He wasn't running, he wasn't hiding, he wasn't afraid. Just hours before one of the most devastating tragedies Hollywood has ever witnessed, Nick Reiner was caught on camera calmly walking near his parents' home. A bag hung over his shoulder. His steps were steady. His face was blank, almost peaceful. Nothing about him suggested panic. Nothing hinted that a family was about to be destroyed. That image would later haunt investigators, not because of what it showed, but because of what it didn't. 26 days after the tragedy inside the Brentwood home of Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle, the story only grew heavier. What first shocked Hollywood slowly transformed into something far more disturbing. New details began leaking out, piece by piece, each one darkening the picture. A preliminary forensic report quietly narrowed the timeline, and what it suggested shook even the most experienced investigators. Authorities now believe what happened that night was not a sudden, not random, and not a single emotional explosion. Instead, it was the result of pressure that had been building silently beneath the surface for a long time. Sources believe the night may have started earlier, at Conan O'Brien's Christmas party, a gathering meant to be warm and familiar, a place of laughter and safety. But several guests later recalled something felt wrong. Nick didn't look furious. He didn't look out of control. He looked off, tense, unpredictable, unsettlingly normal. What reportedly began as an argument at that party didn't end there. It followed him long after the night was over, lingering like something unresolved, something dangerous. After leaving the party, Nick allegedly returned to the Brentwood area. Witnesses say he appeared calm on the outside, controlled in his movements, deliberate in every step. There was no visible breakdown, no sign of chaos. Investigators say he later checked into a nearby hotel. Staff described him as quiet, composed, forgettable. He paid. He went to his room. He drew no attention. Then came the moment that stunned nearly everyone watching the case unfold. Records indicate Nick quickly secured the services of Alan Jackson, one of the most high-profile defense attorneys in the country, using family inheritance funds. The speed of that decision raised a chilling question. How much had he already anticipated what was coming? According to authorities, the incident inside the home occurred sometime between midnight and the early morning hours. There were no signs of forced entry because none were needed. Nick had access. He knew the house, every hallway, every room, every corner. Security records later placed him at a Santa Monica hotel around 4 a.m, roughly 20 minutes from Brentwood. Hotel staff noticed nothing unusual, no panic, no visible distress, just a man sitting quietly, detached, as if emotionally drained of everything. Hours later, concern turned into alarm. A scheduled visitor arrived at the home. There was no response. Calls were made. Doors were opened. And in that moment, everything changed forever. What had once been a place of comfort and protection became the center of an investigation that would stun Hollywood and raise questions no one was prepared to answer. The timeline that followed only deepened the mystery. Forensic estimates later suggested Rob and Michelle had already been gone for several hours before they were discovered. That realization hit investigators hard because it meant time had passed, silence had stretched, and whatever happened inside that house was not brief. Authorities began asking a question that refused to go away. What pushed Nick to that breaking point? Investigators believe Nick may have attempted to clean himself up after the incident. possibly inside the home, or later at the hotel. Despite those efforts, experts say traces of evidence could still remain on clothing, on skin, in places difficult to erase completely. Surveillance cameras tracked his movements throughout Santa Monica that same morning, quietly documenting a path that would later be reconstructed frame by frame. Nothing suggested panic, only distance. One detail sent a chill through everyone reviewing the case. Experts believe the object used was likely taken from inside the home. Nothing elaborate, nothing pre-planned, something ordinary, easily accessible. That single fact added another layer of horror because it meant familiarity mattered. Nick didn't need to search, he didn't need to prepare. He knew exactly where he was and where everything was. Early assumptions collapsed as forensic analysis continued. Initial reports suggesting a single act were corrected. Medical findings revealed multiple serious injuries. This was not a momentary loss of control. Forensic experts explained that repeated injuries typically indicate sustained effort, proximity, control, time. This wasn't something that happened in a second, it unfolded, and that distinction changed everything. The specialists emphasized something the movies never show. Incidents like this require a strength, coordination, prolonged contact. They are not chaotic explosions. They are methodical. Investigators describe the scene as deliberate rather than frenzied. Every detail pointed toward intention, not impulse. Another deeply troubling detail soon emerged. Early reports suggested the couple may have been resting when it began. If true, it meant the person responsible understood their routines, their habits, their vulnerabilities. Experts say actions taken at such close range reflect a complete invasion of personal space. This wasn't distant, it wasn't detached, it was personal. Attention then shifted to what happened afterward. Surveillance footage from an Arco gas station later captured Nick buying a sports drink. He paced slightly, scanned the area, restless but still composed enough to complete the purchase. Minutes later, law enforcement moved in. There was no struggle, no resistance, no explanation. He surrendered quietly. Footage from the arrest told its own story. Nick didn't look panicked. He didn't look afraid. He looked empty, like someone emotionally drained to the core. Officers later confirmed he went into custody willingly. No weapon, no confrontation, just silence. Then came another shocking revelation. Records showed Nick had already secured high-profile legal representation funded by family inheritance. The speed of that move stunned the public. Questions exploded overnight. How much would this defense cost? Where was the money really coming from? And how long had this been planned? Nick had no significant independent income. His past work was limited, often connected to his father. The funding source was impossible to ignore. As media pressure intensified, silence followed. When questioned, the attorney declined to explain who was paying the fees. That silence fueled speculation. Some suggested the strategy. Others whispered about private arrangements. No one offered clarity. Then came a stunning update. Multiple insiders claimed the legal fees were being covered by the family estate, valued at roughly $200 million. According to sources, surviving relatives believed pursuing a mental health-based defense would be the most humane path forward. They reportedly felt it aligned with what the parents might have wanted for their son. But under the law, a painful reality loomed. Anyone convicted in such a case cannot benefit from the victim's estate. Now, loyalty, justice, and morality were colliding in real time. Legal experts explained that while estate funds can technically be used before a verdict, the practice is deeply controversial and legally risky. And as of now, no official confirmation has been made. Only more questions, only heavier silence. Behind the headlines and the privilege, there was a long and painful struggle. Long before that night, Nick's life had been unraveling quietly. Born in 1993, he reportedly began experimenting with substances at a shockingly young age, around 15. What started as curiosity quickly became a pattern, and that pattern soon turned into a cycle that was nearly impossible to break. Growing up under fame, expectations, and constant attention, Nick's world often felt overwhelming and isolating. Those closest to him saw the warning signs early, and they didn't ignore them. His parents tried everything they knew how to do: rehabilitation programs, therapy, structure, support. They sent him to treatment while he was still a teenager. That marked the beginning of years spent moving between recovery and relapse. But no matter how many times he fell, they never walked away. They continued offering help, stability, and second chances, even allowing him to return home again and again, hoping familiarity might steady him. Rob Reiner believed purpose could save him. Friends say Rob spent countless hours trying to guide his son through creative projects, hoping a structure and meaning could offer something addiction never could. He believed that if Nick had something to build, something to create, it might give him a reason to keep going. For a while, it seemed to work. In 2015, there was a brief moment of hope. At just 22, Nick stayed clean long enough to work with his father on the film Being Charlie, a story that mirrored his own struggles. For a moment, redemption felt possible. Trust slowly rebuilt. The family exhaled, hope returned, but addiction is relentless. By 2018, everything unraveled again. Nick relapsed hard, deeper than before. During one episode marked by confusion and rage, he reportedly caused serious damage to his parents' property. That moment pushed the family to their breaking point. They made another painful decision: treatment again. They still believed saving him was possible. By 2020, Nick was allowed back into the Brentwood home once more. This time, the hope felt fragile. Friends say his behavior grew more unpredictable in the months leading up to the incident. Mood swings, disappearances, late-night calls that left his parents anxious and exhausted. The house meant to protect him slowly became a pressure cooker. Fear, worry, unanswered questions. Then came what friends described as tough love. At some point, boundaries were drawn, and when that happened, Nick chose to leave. He drifted from place to place, Maine, New Jersey, Texas, chasing freedom, but finding instability instead. Those years would later be described as his darkest: disconnected, living rough, leaning on substances just to survive another day. His family watched from a distance, powerless to pull him back. When he eventually returned, something felt different. Those close to the family say their hope was fading fast. Nick's mental state appeared fragile, his behavior increasingly erratic. The warning signs were there, but no one could predict where it would all lead. That long history now sits at the center of the legal battle because it raises a painful question. At what point does love stop being protection and start becoming permission? Insiders believe the defense may focus heavily on mental condition and addiction, years of substance use, impaired judgment, loss of emotional control. Witnesses at the Santa Monica Hotel later described Nick as heavily impaired afterward, a detail investigators have acknowledged. But legally, substance use rarely removes responsibility. At best, it can influence how intent is interpreted, and intent is everything. Prosecutors point to something else entirely: preparation, sequence, deliberate behavior. If actions show awareness rather than confusion, that argument becomes extremely difficult to overcome. This case now stands at the intersection of addiction and accountability, a line the justice system struggles to define. And the stakes could not be higher. The night many believe set everything in motion looked harmless at first. Conan O'Brien's annual Christmas party had always been one of Hollywood's most relaxed gatherings. No cameras, no pressure, just familiar faces, laughter, and warmth. Rob and Michelle were longtime guests, but this year was different. They brought Nick with them. Friends later said the decision wasn't casual. In the months leading up to that night, Nick's behavior had grown increasingly unpredictable. Sudden disappearances, mood swings, late-night calls that left his parents anxious and exhausted. They didn't want to leave him alone. Bringing him along felt safer. Maybe the warmth of familiar faces could steady him. Maybe the night would pass quietly. Nick wasn't originally on the guest list. Rob personally reached out and asked. Conan agreed immediately. At first, everything appeared normal. Rob greeted friends. Conan welcomed guests warmly. Michelle stood out in an elegant dark dress, but Nick didn't blend in. While laughter filled the room, Nick stayed on the edges. Hoodie pulled tight, eyes constantly scanning. Several guests later said his energy felt wrong. He began approaching people abruptly, asking flat, uncomfortable questions. What's your full name? Are you famous? There was no humor in his voice, no curiosity, just intensity. Most guests answered politely, then stepped away. Some exchanged uneasy looks. Others whispered that something didn't feel right. One actress later said she felt a sudden chill when Nick stood too close, staring without blinking. The room began to shift. The tension escalated quietly, then all at once. Nick interrupted private conversations, repeated the same questions, ignored every attempt to calm him down. When someone gently asked for the space, Nick didn't argue. He just stood there, silent, frozen, eyes locked. Then suddenly he turned and walked away fast. The mood changed instantly. Conversations dropped, laughter faded, eyes followed him toward the exit. What had been a relaxed celebration tightened into discomfort. Michelle tried to smooth things over, smiling and chatting, but her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway. Rob stayed close, protective, watching his son without drawing attention. Nick moved through the house like he wasn't fully there, from the living room to the patio to the bar, mumbling under his breath, holding a drink he barely touched. Witnesses described him as distant, confused, almost haunted. At one point, Rob gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" Nick didn't respond. He just stared forward, then walked away again. By around 10 o'clock, the party was still going, but the Reiners were done. Michelle quietly told a close friend she wanted to leave. Nick wasn't doing well. Guests noticed Rob and Michelle standing off to the side, whispering, trying to decide what to do next. Then voices rose, not loud enough to stop the music, but sharp enough to turn heads. Nick accused his parents of talking about him. His voice edged with anger. Rob tried to calm him. "Let's just go home." Nick pushed past him, knocking over a small table of drinks. That's when others stepped in, trying to de-escalate. It's okay. Let's get some air. Outside, the cold night hit hard. Rob guided Nick toward the car, speaking calmly, trying to reason with him. Michelle stayed a few steps behind, visibly shaken. Witnesses say Nick's hands were trembling as he paced, arguing in bursts. He shouted something incoherent before finally getting into the car and slamming the door. The Reiners left quietly. To most guests, it was just an awkward moment. But for Rob and Michelle, that drive home marked the beginning of their final hours. The house they returned to, a place built on years of patience and love and trying to save their son, would soon become something else entirely. Neighbors later reported hearing muffled voices around midnight. Nothing alarming, just a family disagreement. By morning, that same house would be at the center of an investigation that stunned Hollywood. The drive home was quiet, but the tension never left. Witnesses believe the argument didn't end when the car pulled away from the party. Inside the vehicle, Nick reportedly accused his parents of embarrassing him. Rob tried to de-escalate. He urged calm. He suggested rest. But the anger didn't fade. It followed them home. Once inside the house, the atmosphere shifted. The familiar walls, the quiet rooms, the place that had once been meant to heal. Instead of settling, the confrontation intensified. Investigators believe that sometime between midnight and the early morning hours, Nick entered the master bedroom where his parents were resting. What drove him in that moment remains unclear. Anger, emotional collapse, loss of control. No single explanation fully fits. What followed was described only in fragments. Authorities have avoided releasing explicit details, but forensic specialists describe the incident as extreme, one that unfolded over time, not in an instant. This wasn't a sudden outburst, it was sustained, and that distinction carries enormous weight. What makes the story harder to process is how ordinary the night began. Friends say Rob and Michelle had been cautiously hopeful about Nick's progress. Therapy, medication, a structure. Rob had even spoken about a new creative project they might work on together. Something grounding, something constructive, something that could give Nick direction again. No one imagined how quickly everything would unravel. By the next afternoon, the discovery stunned Hollywood. What first spread as whispers quickly became confirmation. Tributes flooded social media. Colleagues, friends, and fans struggled to understand how a family so deeply loved could be torn apart in a single night. Attention shifted immediately to Nick, his mental state, his history. The warning signs people now wondered if they had missed. Old words resurfaced with painful clarity. In a past interview, Nick once said, "I feel like I was born into a spotlight I never asked for." Those words now echoed differently. He wasn't speaking about fame, he was describing weight. Investigators continued building the case piece by piece. Surveillance footage, forensic evidence, witness statements from the party. The timeline sharpened. Nick's erratic behavior earlier that evening, the argument, the abrupt departure, his movements afterward, everything began to align. But even as the evidence is stacked up, deeper questions remained. Questions about responsibility, about limits, about how far love can stretch before it breaks. Psychologists consulted by multiple outlets described the situation as a perfect storm. Long-term instability, emotional volatility, unresolved trauma, all colliding at once. Hollywood was forced into uncomfortable reflection. Several insiders admitted they had noticed Nick's behavior over the years. at events, on sets, in private moments, but it was often dismissed. Another quirk, another troubled child of fame, until it wasn't. As the trial approached, grief spread outward. Producers expressed disbelief. Actors described the loss as unreal. Friends remembered Michelle for her warmth and steadiness. She believed he would get better. One longtime friend said quietly, "That's what makes this unbearable." Now the case refuses to fade. Every filing, every hearing, every new detail reignites debate. Mental health, privilege, accountability. It feels cinematic, but it's painfully real. The night that began with laughter ended in irreversible silence. A celebration turned into a warning. A family gathering became a final memory. And the house that once symbolized patience and hope became a reminder of how fragile everything really is. When Nick appeared in court for the first time, the weight of it all became undeniable. He entered wearing a standard blue inmate uniform, a stark contrast to the life he once knew. Standing beside him was Alan Jackson, calm, composed, and fully in control. No cameras were allowed inside the courtroom. The silence only fueled public curiosity. Nick faced 2 counts of first-degree charges with aggravating circumstances, multiple victims, multiple injuries, and a case already described as one of the most complex Hollywood has seen in decades. Jackson immediately requested a delay of the formal arraignment, giving Nick time to decide how to proceed. The judge agreed. Until then, Nick would remain in custody at the Los Angeles County Jail. The only time the public heard Nick's voice was brief and chilling. The judge asked if he would waive his right to a speedy trial. His answer was flat. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." No explanation, no emotion, just a mechanical response that echoed through the room. And then it was over. Now all eyes turned toward what comes next. Legal experts say the case could take years to reach trial, late 2026, possibly even 2027. A plea deal is considered unlikely. Prosecutors are expected to lean heavily on physical evidence, forensic reconstruction, and a clear narrative of escalation. They will argue awareness, control, intent. If convicted of the most serious charges, the consequences are severe. Life in prison without the possibility of release. Even without special circumstances, sentencing could still range from 25 years to life. Under the law, addiction alone does not excuse what happened. At best, it may influence how intent is interpreted, but intent remains the center of everything. The defense faces an uphill battle, years of substance abuse, mental health struggles, a long documented history. All of it may explain behavior, but explanation is not the same as absolution, and jurors will be asked to decide where compassion ends and accountability begins. The potential witness list only deepens the gravity. Names tied to decades of Hollywood history, people who were there that night, people who noticed the warning signs, people who may now be forced to relive them publicly. This trial will not just examine a crime, it will examine a family. At the center of it all is a question no verdict can fully answer. How far can love stretch before it breaks? Rob and Michelle spent years trying to save their son. They believed in patience, in forgiveness, in never giving up. That devotion shaped every decision they made, and it ended in unimaginable loss. This story endures not only because of what happened, but because of what it destroyed. A family that fought for years to stay together, a belief that care and opportunity could always heal, a reminder that fame and success do not protect anyone from inner chaos. The night ended long ago, but the questions remain. Was there a moment when this could have been stopped? Were the warning signs loud enough, or only obvious in hindsight? We may never fully understand that final night, but we can remember who they were before everything fell apart. And that may be the heaviest truth of all.